So as we continue Matthew chapter 5, we cut off last time. We stopped at verse 12. We were talking about the Beatitudes. Jesus explains the life that we should be living, that sacrificial life that Christians, that we as children of God should be living. And as you'll notice as we look back to Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12, Jesus, when he lays out these things, he doesn't say, blessed is the man who keeps the law, blessed is the man who keeps the Ten Commandments, blessed is the man who does those things. He lays out those other attributes of the things the life a person should be living, and their attitude in those things. And so, but now as he goes into the next few verses, and from verses 13 through the end of the chapter in Matthew 5, Jesus is going to touch on a variety of topics, and some of those are going to be centered around the law, Jesus' relationship to the Word of God, Jesus' relationship to the law. When we say the law, we're talking about the Old Testament law, the Ten Commandments, and the things that the prophets had written, the prophets in the Old Testament had put down, and that God had revealed to them, and what was Jesus' relationship to the law. So he'll explain those things, and he'll kind of correct some things. The Pharisees throughout their time, during the time of Jesus, they had corrupted the law. They had taken the law and turned it into something that it was not. And so we'll see that as we talk about those things. But he starts and he goes back. When we ended in verse 12, we start in verse 13. Jesus makes a comparison that we are salt and light in this world, that the Christian is salt and light. He just got done teaching about what we call the Beatitudes, and where he said, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And then blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for doing right, for following after God. You will be persecuted. You will be ridiculed. You will have some hard times for that. I'd rather have hard times because I'm doing right than hard times because I'm doing wrong. I often say, life is hard enough when you do right. Don't make it harder by doing wrong. Life's already going to be tough enough without you making it tougher. Don't make it tougher because of bad actions. It's going to be tough enough when you're doing right. So don't make it worse by doing wrong. So, but we'll be persecuted for those things. And God says, you know what? Stick by Him. Do the right thing no matter what, and He will bless you. He will take care of us. My dad, when I go home to see him, sometimes he used to have a little saying on his refrigerator, and that I would, every time I'm there, I would see it. It would say, "Today, do the right thing. Every day, do the right thing." And I remember that. It stuck with me. Just do the right thing every day. When you have the choice between doing right and doing wrong, do right. It's pretty simple. If you have a choice between disobeying God or obeying God, obey God. Just make the right decision. You won't regret it. You'll never regret making the right decision. You might have a good time making sinful decisions and wrong decisions and rebellious decisions sometimes, but at the end you'll regret it. It will only lead you to regret. So at the end of the day, do right. Make up your mind today. Look, no matter what, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to do right. No matter how badly I want to do wrong, I'm going to do right. I'm just going to do the right thing each and every day. So he gets to verse 13, and Jesus says to the crowd, to the multitude, to his disciples, he said, "You are the salt of the earth." Well, salt is valuable. It was especially valuable during the times of Jesus. Salt was and is a preservative. It keeps things from rotting. It keeps things from spoiling, from going bad. You can salt meat in order to preserve it. You can salt certain things in order to preserve those things. And in that culture, at that time, there was no refrigeration. There was no way of preserving things like we have today. We have refrigerators and coolers, and we have ice. and we have those things that we can freeze meat, we can do certain things that preserve food for us. Back then, salt was a preservative, and it delayed, it slowed down the rotting process or the decaying process. So salt is where we get the word salary. If you receive a salary, you do a job and you receive a salary, it derives from the word salt, because many soldiers and other people during the times of Jesus were paid wages in salt because salt was valuable. You've heard the old saying, he's not worth his salt, or he's certainly worth his salt. That's because that's where this comes from. Salt is valuable, was valuable, and back in Jesus' day, it was very valuable because of its preserving aspect, its attributes of being able to preserve or to delay decay, where salt will delay decay. And he's saying here, Christian, you are the salt of the earth. Our job is to delay decay. This world is decaying. The Bible tells us this world is going to get worse and worse. But your job and my job as Christians is to behave in such a way, act in such a way, speak in such a way that delays that decay. In the culture, that we're to speak up, we're to stand up. That's why he says we're going to be persecuted. We're going to be given a hard time for standing up for what's right in a world that only wants to do wrong. If you're just living your life based on what you see in this world, you're going to do wrong. You're just going to, because this world is full of things and people that are wanting to do wrong, full of sin, full of rebellion. And so your job is to move in the opposite direction. The vast majority of the world is moving quickly and fast forward into destruction, into decay. Your job is to go the other way. Don't go that way. Your job is to delay that decaying process in this world. So we're to be salt, and that's what Jesus is saying here. He says, "But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned?" So salt can lose its flavor, and if salt loses its flavor, it's no good. The only reason you put salt on your food is because it has flavor. You're not going to use salt if it has no flavor. And if you have no saltiness in your life, if you have no pushback against wrong, and that's what we mean here. To be salty means you're pushing back against what's wrong. You're pushing back against sin. You're pushing back against rebellion. You're to be salty. And if you're not being salty, then you've lost your flavor, and God says you're no good. You're no good to him. What are you going to do with salt that's lost its flavor? You're going to throw it out. That's what he says here. It's good for nothing. Salt that's lost its flavor, it's good for nothing. It is then thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. So what good are you? Are you salty? Are you the salt of the earth? Are you being salty in your daily life? Are you pushing back against the decay in this world, the decay of your life? Are you pushing back against that? It's going to happen. The decay is going to happen, but your job is to delay it as long as you can. And that's what we do. And then in verse 14, he says, not only are you the salt of the world, you're not only the salt of the earth, but he says you're the light of the world. And Jesus told us and tells us in John and different places that he is the light. So the only light that you and I have is the reflection of Jesus. We reflect Jesus, just like the moon. The moon doesn't have its own light. It just reflects the sun. The sun is that light source in the sky, and then the moon reflects that light source. The moon has, in and of itself, it has no light. It's just a dark object in the sky, but it reflects the light of the sun. You and I, in and of ourselves, we're dark. We're only darkness. Again, John tells us that in John chapter 3. He says that men love darkness more than they love the light. So the only way that you and I really have light is through Jesus, and then we're to reflect that. We're to demonstrate to the world the light of Jesus through our lives, through our actions, through our pushback, through stopping the decay of the world. And he says here in verse 14, you are the light of the world. And then he compares us to a city that's set on a hill. It cannot be hidden. So you're the light of the world. You're also a city that's set up on a hill, and nobody can miss that. People should be taking notice of your light, like a city that's set up on a hill that you can see from miles and miles and miles away. It's very obvious that that city is there. It should be very obvious to people around you who you are, who you represent, whose light you're reflecting. It should be very obvious to people that you are salty, that you are pushing back against anything that's wrong, anything that's sinful, anything that is rebellious. You should be pushing back against that. That is your job and my job, and that's what Jesus is saying here. Verse 15, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket. You don't turn on the light then to just put out the light. You turn on a light so you can see. That's what he's saying here. You don't light a lamp and then put it under a basket. You put it on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. So your job is to give light to everyone, whether you like them or not. Your job is to give light to them. So don't withhold your light from people. Don't withhold the message of Jesus from people. Be the light. Be that encouragement other people need. Be that loving person that other people need. People are going to need you. They need who you are. They need who God made you to be, and you're to be that. Verse 16, so let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. They can see your saltiness. They can see your pushback against sin. They can see that you love other people. They can see that you want to help people. They can see that you love God. Let the world see that, not in an arrogant way. That's not what he's saying here. He says we're to let our light shine before men so they can see your good works and glorify your God in heaven. Remember, Ephesians chapter 2 tells us that God created us and he saved us for good works. We're not saved by doing good works. We're saved in order to do good works. God saved us because of who he is and not because of who we are. God saved us because of who he is, not because of we're good, not because we deserve it. We don't. But he saved us, and in saving us, we should be thankful for that, and therefore we do good works. That's what Ephesians 2 chapter 10 tells us, that because of what God has done for us through his son Jesus Christ, therefore we should willingly do good works that he has called us to. So those works, we have to let those works shine before men so that they could see, how does your life speak? How is your life, what message is your life sending to people around you? What message do you want people to know? You're a billboard. You are a walking billboard. What's that billboard say? What is that billboard saying to the rest of the world? What is that billboard saying to your friends, to your neighbors? What's it saying to your boss? What's it saying to your coworkers? What's it saying to the people at church? What's it saying to the people in the store? What is your life speaking? How do you behave? How do you act? How's your attitude towards things you don't like? Are you keeping a great attitude, or are you sour and negative? It's going to show. Your billboard is going to show. It's going to be, and people, I'll be honest with you, people don't want to see a negative billboard. They don't want to see complaining and negativity and moaning and groaning. They may do it, but they don't want to see it from you. Your job is to be light. Your job is to be salt. Your job is not to be like other people. Your job is to be different than the people around you. So we're to be salt. So Jesus says here in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16, A, we're to be salt, and B, we're to be light. Are you salt and are you light in this world? So he goes on, verse 17. Then now Jesus moves to kind of a different topic here. He's going to start talking about the law and his relationship to the Old Testament law. Remember, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are a transition from the Old Testament to the New Testament. The Gospels are that transition. So who is Jesus in relationship to the law? And he starts out in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, clarifying some things. He says in verse 17, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. He says, I didn't come to destroy or to do away with the Old Testament, the law and the prophets. I didn't come to do away with that. He says, I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill it. To fulfill the Old Testament. Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. He's that thing that now is going to bring it all together and make it all make sense, because the law and the prophets through all the Old Testament, from Genesis to Malachi, all of those books of the Old Testament, the primary focus is about the coming Messiah. It's about the prophetic words that these prophets spoke about the coming Messiah. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prophetic statements and prophetic passages about the coming Messiah. And Jesus is going to demonstrate that he fulfills all of those prophetic statements, those prophetic passages that the prophets spoke about. From where he would be born to how he would die to how he would live, and all of those things. Those were all fulfilled, hundreds of them. It's almost impossible for one person to fulfill all of those prophecies, but Jesus Christ did just that. He fulfilled all of those. That one man, Jesus Christ, fulfilled all of the prophecy of the coming Messiah. So he's saying here in verse 17, he said, I did not come to destroy the law. I'm not doing away with the law. I am the fulfillment of everything that the law has been pointing toward. Remember, why was the law written? Why were the Ten Commandments given to us? What was the purpose of the Ten Commandments? The primary purpose of the Ten Commandments was to show us that we can't keep them, to show us that it is impossible for me to keep all of those commandments in order to be perfect, in order to go to heaven. I cannot do that. You and I cannot do that. And Jesus is going to continue to demonstrate that here in Matthew chapter 5. It's a standard that none of us can obtain, can hold to. That standard of the Old Testament, of the law, the Ten Commandments. We cannot keep that, and so it's only through Jesus Christ and his work on the cross and his salvation through his death, burial, and resurrection that we are able to now be received into the family of God through Jesus' perfect keeping of the law. Jesus is the perfect keeper of the law. He is the perfect fulfillment of the law. Therefore, through him, you and I can keep the law and fulfill the law, even when we fall short. It is in him and him alone, his grace and his mercy. God demanded a sacrifice for sin. And you and I are not that sacrifice because we're not perfect. Jesus is the sacrifice because he is perfect. And a perfect sacrifice was required in order to fulfill the penalty for sin. You and I cannot do that. Apart from Jesus, you and I cannot and will not be able to overcome sin in our lives. But it's only through Jesus Christ and through him alone. He's our advocate, that we are able to receive salvation. We are able to stand before God, and God says, you're my child, you're my son, you're my daughter. And it's through Jesus Christ that occurs. He is the perfect fulfillment of the law. So he's saying here, I didn't come to destroy it. Hey, don't worry, I didn't come to set everything aside. I'm just fulfilling it. I am the one that grows up into the law, and you'll now see what the real purpose of the law is and was. And now he's going to explain some things to us, that it's not just about the keeping of the law. It's about your heart. Jesus is not trying to get us to be rule keepers. He's trying to get to our heart. When we have a heart that yearns for righteousness, I don't need rules. I don't need somebody to tell me what to do and not to do. I'm just going to do right because I love God. So it's not about rule keeping. It's about your heart. It's about, who do you love? Do you love God? If you love God, you'll obey him. Not because somebody made you, or you're going to be punished because you don't obey him, but you obey him out of obedience. So he says here in that verse 17, do not think that I've come to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not. I did not come to destroy it, but to fulfill the law and the prophets. For verse 18, for assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law until it is filled. He uses the word jot and tittle here. What's a jot and tittle? There are very small characters of the Hebrew language. It's like the dot over an I, or the cross in a T. These are the smallest characters of the Hebrew language. And he says, look, not one bit of the law is going to pass away. Not even the dot over an I is going to pass away. Not even the cross in your T is going to pass away. None of that. All of the law will be preserved in him. It is all preserved, and it will by no means, none of it will pass away. And verse 19, he says, whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And he's going to go on to explain some things here about the law and the true meaning of the law, of those rules that God has given to us. He says in verse 20, for I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And the scribes and the Pharisees were almost perfect keepers of the law. They kept the rules very, very well, and that's what Jesus is saying here. Look, he says, if you're in order to get into heaven, you got to be a perfect rule keeper, just like these guys were. But the Pharisees, their hearts were wicked, and he's going to reveal that over and over and over. But yet he says here, he says, unless you're like the Pharisees and the scribes and their keeping of the law, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And he's kind of making this almost oxymoron type of contradictory type of comparison here to the Pharisees, who we know at heart are just as wicked as they can be. But he's telling the people, he says, look, unless your righteousness exceeds them in their law keeping, you can't get into the kingdom of heaven. And he's right. But at the end of the day, it's not about law keeping. It's about your heart. And that's what Jesus is getting to. The fulfillment of the law is about your heart. Do you have a heart change? Until you have a heart change, you're not going to have a life change. Life change doesn't occur first. Heart change has to occur first. And until you realize, like we learned in Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12, that you're poor in spirit, and if you're not mourning over that, and if you're not being a peacemaker, and if you're not showing mercy because you understand that you have been shown mercy, if you're not broken over your sin and broken over the things that you've been doing in your life that have brought corruption and terrible consequences, if you're not broken over that, and if you're not mourning over that, and if you're not crying out to God about that, then there's no heart change yet. And so Jesus is saying, look, there's got to be a heart change. And until that occurs, you're just like a Pharisee. You're just trying to be a rule keeper. I don't need a rule keeper. God doesn't need a rule keeper. He needs heart change in your life. And that's what he's getting at. That's what Jesus is getting at here. So he starts now on some of the big laws, right? One of the big laws would be killing. Thou shalt not kill. That's part of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Right? So he moves right to, Jesus is going to move to these big commandments here. And he says in verse 21, you have heard it was said to those of old in the Old Testament by the prophets, you shall not murder. You shall not kill innocent people. Right? That's murder. Murder is the killing of somebody who hasn't done anything or been convicted of anything that's worthy of the death penalty here. So he says, you shall not murder. And whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. They'll be in danger of death. So life for life. That was an Old Testament law. It's a New Testament as well. But he says, hey, if you were to murder somebody, then the penalty for that would be you would receive the death penalty. He says, you have heard that it was said in the law that you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Jesus lays out almost some name calling here, because when we call people names, it reveals our heart. And Jesus is saying, look, physical murder is not the real issue. If you have hatred in your heart for your brother, if you have hatred toward other people, if you don't like people, and you're bad mouthing them, and you have a bad attitude towards other people, he says you're guilty of murder. See, this is a heart issue. So how I think about other people, my attitude towards other people, how I treat other people, if I hate other people, he says you are guilty of murder. And it's an attitude that he is looking at the heart. I've never killed anybody physically, but I'm guilty of murder because I have held hatred in my heart towards somebody else. And if that's the standard, I can't make it to heaven on my own. I have to have a Savior. I have to have Jesus Christ being my intercessor, being my advocate for me, placing my faith and my trust in him, asking for forgiveness for hating other people, and then turning around and repenting of that and treating them right. Because in and of my own heart, I can't make it to heaven. I can't do it. My actions, if that's the standard that Jesus is laying out, that, look, I'm already a murderer. You're already a murderer. You're already a murderer in your heart. So, and he says here, if that's the case, you're in danger of hell. You're in danger of hellfire. So without Jesus, you ain't gonna make it. Without placing your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, we're not gonna make it. So he says here in verse 23, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Jesus says, your worship isn't even any good to me if you have something against somebody. If you have bitterness, anger, you have hatred in your heart towards somebody, when you come to worship in church, you can't. Jesus says, I don't even recognize it. I don't recognize your giving. I don't recognize your worship because you have something against your brother. And you need to leave and go get that right with them before you do anything else. You need to do that. So if do you have something against somebody? Are you holding bitterness and anger against a loved one, a friend, a relative, somebody who's wronged you? Doesn't matter if they're sorry about it. Doesn't matter if they've hurt you and they're not sorry about it. They don't care. Doesn't matter. Have you forgiven them? You can't control them, but you can control you. So you've got to decide in your heart that you're not going to harbor that anger and that bitterness and that hatred anymore towards that person. Free yourself from the prison that they have put you in by forgiving them. Doesn't mean that you have to hang around them. Doesn't mean that you have to trust them. Doesn't mean that. It just means you've got to release them of that anger and that bitterness that you're holding towards that person. So he says, verse 25, agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown in prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of here until you have paid the last penny. In a nutshell, what Jesus is saying here is get it right with the people that you have something against. You need to get that right with them immediately. You need to do that as soon as you can. Get those things right with people that you harbor resentment and bitterness and anger against. And then he goes on. So he's talked about murder. What is murder? Murder is a heart issue. It's not a physical issue only. It's not the killing of somebody, but it's in your heart first. Before we sin, before we do something wrong, it's in our heart first. And if it's in our heart, we've already done it. That's what Jesus is saying. It's not the act of it, it's the thinking about it. In our addiction, we think about it. I'm already guilty. Even though I might not have used, I'm already guilty. If I'm thinking about it, I'm already running it through my mind, I'm already guilty. Get it. That's why Paul says, get it out right there. Cast it down. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. Go look them up. He says, cast those thoughts down. Get them out of your mind now, because the thinking on it is already the sin. Before you even do it, it's the thinking on it. Get rid of that thinking. Put it out of your heart. Get it out of there immediately. So in verse 27, he says, you have heard it was said by those of old, you shall not commit adultery. So now he's going to hit, first he hit murder, now he's going to hit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It's a heart issue. Maybe you didn't physically sleep with that woman who is not your wife. But if you thought about it and you dwelt on it and you contemplated it and you run it over and over in your mind, Jesus says you're guilty. What's the old saying? I can still look. No, you can't. Jesus says, no, you can't look. You can't lust after women. You can't. Jesus says you are guilty of adultery if you're doing that. You're guilty of sexual sin. That's a standard that's much higher than just saying don't commit adultery. It's a heart issue. So where's your heart? Where is your heart? But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That's verse 28, Matthew 5:28. Verse 29, if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. Now, Jesus is being metaphorical here. He's not truly meaning that, hey, if your eye causes you to lust, then poke your eye out. He's saying, look, this is how serious. He's demonstrating to you the seriousness of the offense. Okay? If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If it's your eyes that are causing you to look at lust upon a woman, then pluck them out. Don't pluck your eyes out, okay? Jesus is demonstrating the seriousness of what he's talking about. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for the whole body to be cast into hell. This is how serious this issue is for Jesus. Verse 31, he says, furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Moses in the Old Testament allowed for divorce. He didn't like it. God didn't like it, but he allowed it. And the Pharisees and the scribes, they would take advantage of this. They would abuse this. There was only very, very few reasons that they would actually allow for divorce. But the Pharisees had taken this to a whole new level. They believed that, hey, if my wife burned the toast, that's a reason enough to divorce her. At the same time, they expected their wives to be loyal to them, but yet at the same time, these Pharisees were out there sleeping around with other women and finding loopholes in the Word of God to allow that to happen. Again, their heart was not right with God, and what he's getting to is a heart issue. This is a heart issue. So he says, furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual morality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. So, A, don't divorce, is what he's saying here. And the only reason that you can divorce is if there's been adultery in the marriage. And he's saying that, look, if you divorce your wife for reasons that are not legitimate, then when she remarries or you remarry, you're still in an adulterous relationship, because even though maybe on paper you're no longer married, God says you're still married in his eyes. So in God's eyes, you're committing adultery. And so it's a very difficult passage here. We don't like to read this because divorce is so easy in the United States of America. Marriage in our nation has become something other than what God designed it to be. Government has taken control of marriage and has decided to define marriage how it wants to define marriage. It can let marriage dissolve how it decides it can dissolve. And it's not biblical, it's not honest, it's not natural, but that's where we are in our country. But understand, in the eyes of God, that's the only thing that counts. Government can do what it wants. Government can define marriage how it wants to define marriage. If it wants to say marriage is between two men, well, it can do that. If the government wants to say marriage is between two women, it can do that. If the government wants to say the marriage is between a man and a building, well, it's stupid. But government can do that. Government tends to do stupid things. Government always morphs towards stupidity, not and immorality, and not intelligence and morality. It's just the nature of government. However, what does God say? And that's got to be your focus. What does God say about this issue? And that's what I have to go with. So he says in here, he keeps on. He talks about the issue of. In verse 33, he says, again, you have heard that it was said by those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. The Old Testament stated that we shouldn't swear by God, right? So what was happening is the religious leaders were then swearing by everything else, right? Well, I swear on this table that I'm telling the truth. And Jesus, when he's getting here to this idea of oaths, he says, look, you shouldn't need an oath to convince somebody you're telling the truth. Let me read this passage to you here. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oath to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is God's footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. And so what they were doing is the religious leaders were saying, well, I swear by Jerusalem, or I swear by the earth that I'm telling the truth. Jesus' point here is you shouldn't have to make an oath at all. Your yes should be yes and your no should be no. What comes out of your mouth should be the truth all the time. What comes out of your mouth, I should not doubt. Nobody should doubt that what comes out of your mouth is the absolute truth. I shouldn't have to put my hand on a Bible and say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I shouldn't have to do that. Now, we do that in this nation because we live in a world of liars. Don't be one of them. Don't be a liar. Be a truth teller. So Jesus is saying here to the multitude at this Sermon on the Mount, he says, look, you shouldn't have to swear by anything. Whatever comes out of your mouth, I should be able to believe it. Period. End of discussion. There should be no more discussion about whether you are telling the truth or you're lying. Are you lying or are you telling the truth? I shouldn't have to ask that question. You're either telling the truth or you're not. And I'm going to believe that you're telling the truth if I ask you something. And I'm just, in general, I'm just talking to all of us here, including myself. You should know that if you ask me something, I'm telling you the truth. You shouldn't have to question it, ever. So that's what Jesus is saying here. And then he goes on in verse 38. He says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. To be slapped on the right cheek is a metaphor for an insult. He says, look, if somebody insults you, don't respond. Don't respond to an insult. Shallow people are insulting other people. So he says, look, when somebody insults you, just take it and move on. There's no need to respond to that. He says, so turn the other cheek, just give them, hey, if they're hitting you on the right cheek, that's a metaphor for an insult. He says, give them the other cheek. Just, hey, thank you, can I have another? But don't respond with an insult, because now you just entered into their shallowness. Shallow people insult, okay? And so we don't want to be insulting. Turn the other cheek. So he says, if anyone wants to sue you, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. By Old Testament law, they could sue me and take my suit, but they couldn't take my coat. Kind of a weird law, but they couldn't do that. He says, look, yeah, they can sue you and take your tunic, but they can't sue you and take your cloak. That's against the law. So you just give it to them. So if they're coming after you, if they're just gonna come after you and be vengeful, and they're trying to get to you, you know what? Just give them your coat as well. Just don't play their games. So many times the problem is we enter into these games, and God says, don't play these games. You know what? If they're gonna take your credit card, give them your Visa. If they're gonna take your MasterCard, give them your Visa too. Just move on. Don't play their games. Stop playing games, insult games with each other, and taking from one another. And that's what he's saying here. And he says, and whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. So what he says here, if he compels you to go 1 mile, go 2. The idea here is that a Roman soldier could compel a Jewish, an Israelite, to carry their gear for a mile. By law, by Roman law, they could say, pick up my gear and carry it for a mile. And the Jews hated it because they could be compelled to do this. So Jesus is saying, you know what? When they ask you to do it, go 2 miles. What do you think is going to happen now when all of a sudden, it used to be that when I was told I had to carry this gear for a mile, for the whole way I complained about it and I moaned about it. Instead, now you're going to change that around, Jesus says. When he tells you to go 1 mile, go 2. What do you think is going to happen when you now carry that gear a whole nother mile for that Roman soldier? He's going to look at you kind of strange. The whole relationship just changed. So when you're asked to do something you don't like, do it to the best of your ability and go beyond what you've been asked to do. There's lots of things I've been asked to do that I don't like. So therefore, when I'm asked to do them, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, the best way that I can, and do the best job that I can, and not leave any room for complaining, for being negative, for any of that. I'm going to make the best of that situation, and I'm going to do a better job, and I'm going to do more than what they asked me, even though I don't want to. So, look, I'm at 41 minutes here on this video. I know we're in chapter 5, and we still have a few verses to go, but I'm going to end it right there. We'll pick it up when we jump into chapter 6. We'll pick it up because I don't like to make these videos too long. So we're at the end of chapter 5, and just a few questions for us. How's your thought life? How's your thinking? Remember, it's not how you act, it's how your attitude is. It's your heart. How's your heart? Do you have a heart issue? Do you have a thinking issue? Yeah, we all do. Because before we do wrong, we think wrong. And Jesus says you need to get that thinking under control. Your thinking, your heart is your problem. Your actions just follow. The problem is long before the action ever comes. It's a heart problem. How's your thinking? Are you willing to go the extra mile? Are you telling the truth all the time? Are you willing to make the sacrifice? Are you entertaining thoughts about women that you shouldn't be entertaining, that you should be casting down? Those are just some thoughts that we need to think through here as we end this session. And remember that we started chapter 5 with the blessed life. Jesus is trying to give you and I the tools we need to have the blessed life, which is the best life. And so I ask you today, or I encourage you today, go and have a blessed day and the best day.